Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, my name is Henrik Urdal and I'm the director here at the Peace Research Institute Oslo, PRIO. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this launch of the research project EuroWARCHILD, European Children Born of War. The plight of children in armed conflict is an important research area, and there is increasing research as well as policy engagement in this field, yet it is too often overlooked. Therefore, it's crucial to strengthen research that looks at this particular group of children who are conceived through both love relationships and violence. The EuroWARCHILD project does this by asking what it means to grow up as a child born of war. It is the first research project to examine different groups of war children in the European context, across conflicts, security settings, and generations. By incorporating insights and experiences from the Second World War and up until today, the project resituates Europe as a post-conflict space, highlighting the difficulty in determining when wars actually end, an especially pertinent question at a time when we have war again in Europe. The project is a valued collaboration between PRIO and the Centre for Gender Research at the University of Oslo, and it adds importantly to projects and activities already happening at the PRIO Centre on Gender, Peace and Security. Today, we will hear from a prominent group of panelists, Winfried Belau, Leila Damon, Elna Jonsson, and Dr. Norman Mukasa, who have come to share their unique insights. We are also joined today by Katrina Andersen, Special Representative for Protection of Civilians at the Section for Humanitarian Affairs at the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and Gunvor Knag Fylkenes, Advocacy and Communication Director of Save the Children Norway, who will talk about their work on the topic of children born of war. I'm further honored to welcome Special Representative of the United Nations Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict under Secretary General Pramila Patten to give the keynote address online a little later in the program. Before handing the floor over to the leader of the project, Professor Inger Schelsbeck, I would like to thank the speakers here today for their engagement on this topic and wish the researchers in the project the very best of luck in their important work ahead. Thank you, and over to you, Inger.
Thank you, Henrik, for those kind words of welcome. And thanks to, can you hear me? Yes. Thanks to everyone who is here today. And also welcome to those of you who follow this event in the digital space. My name is Inger Schelsbeck. I am fortunate to be the leader of this project that we're launching here. I'm professor at the Center for Gender Research at the University of Oslo, also the leader of that center, and I'm also a research professor here at PRIO, part of the PRIO Centre on Gender, Peace and Security. I'll try now very, very briefly to outline what we aim to do in this project. Starting with formalities. As you see, it's funded by the European Research Council. It's a Consolidator Grant running from the period 2021 until 2026. And we have received what seems like an enormous amount of money to me, 18 million kroner, to work on these topics for the coming years. Now, you might wonder why we have the launch in 2022 when the project started in 2021. Of course, there is Corona and all of this, but it also takes time to actually put together a team. So we spent a little bit of time putting together a great team, and you'll meet all of them throughout the day. Torunn Tryggestad, Ingvild Mochman, and PhD scholars Johanne Rokke Elvebakke and Lina Stotz, and you'll hear from them in a minute. As was said, The project is based at the University of Oslo, and that means that the University of Oslo owns the project, but PRIO is an institutional partner. And one important aspect of the project is to have communications and dialogue with policy and practice communities, and this is where PRIO comes in. So the role of PRIO is to facilitate this dialogue, and that is why we have the launch here with various groups, the research group, research participants, and policy and practice representatives. And this is something that we will work on also throughout the project to maintain this dialogue, which we think is crucial. So, what will we do in the project? We are, as Henrik said, interested in exploring and better understand the plight of children born of war in Europe, in our present and in our not so far past. Ingvild Mochman, who is here, has written that children born of war are often hidden, stigmatized, and forgotten populations. They are often fathered by enemy soldiers and local mothers, and these children often go under very many different, often very derogatory names in their home countries and communities. And previous experience with children born of war in Europe has been a very difficult one. The children born by enemy fathers in World War II mobilized in the 1990s for legal reparations and recognition in many European countries, including Norway. In 2000, Norwegian Prime Minister at the time, Kjell Magne Bondevik, issued an official apology to the Norwegian children born by Norwegian mothers and German fathers for the way that they had been mistreated by the Norwegian, or by post-war Norway, we could say. In 2018, not so long ago, former Prime Minister Erna Solberg followed up with a new official apology to the Norwegian mothers for the way they had been treated, which was, of course, an apology that came at the time when these mothers were no longer alive. The following year, in 2019, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen apologized to Danish World War II children. Children born by Red Army soldiers who raped German women during World War II have become recognized as a group of war children only in the last couple of decades. And of course, the security situation in Europe and the Cold War era also framed these experiences, or these children, in very particular ways, and different ways, we should say. The Bosnian war children, on the other hand, are not waiting for official apologies, but have since 2018 mobilized amongst themselves and are now asking for various forms of legal and political recognition at home, in the EU, and in the UN and elsewhere. And we're very lucky because we have representatives of all these groups of war children in this room today, and we'll hear from them later. And we have, I would like to add, a lot to learn. But this is not a European problem or issue. It is a concern in many conflicts around the world. And this is why we also have a representative from Uganda who will also talk later today with us about this. And on this screen, or these pictures that you have up here, you see representatives, or the pictures are meant to represent different groups that we will look at in the project. So to the far left, World War II, old pictures. In the middle there, you see Alan Muhic from Gorazde in Bosnia, who was born by war rapes, and who has been a very outspoken person on behalf of this group of children in Bosnia. And we also have children who are under the age of 18 that we will include in our project, but we will not interview them directly because they're still so young. But of course, children born by European foreign fighters is the new group that we need to think about in Europe today. And of course, the situation in the Ukraine, which is unfolding as we're sitting here. Still, we do not know exactly how to tackle that, but there will be children born there who need special attention in the future. What will we do? Well, we will look at these three groups, or these three time periods, children in Europe in these three different time periods: World War II, 1990s, and 2000s. And we want to compare across generations different experiences. And we want to look at similarities and differences between these different groups on certain parameters, and I'll get to that in a minute. What we aim to do is, in a way, to develop a theory of securitized child identities. It's a bit technical. But one thing that often happens with children born of war is that they are seen as threats, threats from within. They are securitized in a way. They are seen or often described as threats to the nation, threats in the family, threats to the communities where they live. So what does that do? What does that mean for those who are on the receiving end of that framing? That is one thing that we want to explore. And we want to explore also how children who are seen in this way, or might be seen in this way, mobilize for recognition. How do you overcome, or how do you address these stories that might be told out loud or hidden about you? And we also want to try to understand how it impacts on individual levels, how those stories, what does it do to you as a person and in your interpersonal relationships. And we will do this by interviewing representatives of these different groups. We will do media analysis. We will build on previous research. We also have people here today who have done research in the past that we will also build on. And try to, on the one hand, facilitate communication between different generations, but also hopefully create knowledge for policymakers and others, so that we do not need to end up in a situation where our politicians need to think out different forms of apologies in the future. And on that note, I will stop and give the word to Lina, one of the PhD students in the project.
Thank you, Inger. My name is Lina, and my PhD project as part of EuroWARCHILD, I should go to the next slide, is titled From Villains to Victims, a victim-centric exploration of the relevance of recognition of victims' rights for children born of war. Children born of war in a study in Rwanda have self-identified as victims of genocide, but to date, children born of war have never been recognized as victims of genocide or any other international crime. In fact, the International Criminal Court has on a couple of occasions even referred to these children as proof of sexual violence, medical consequences, and harm. Several scholars have noted that the law is presently underdeveloped and re-stigmatizing when it comes to children born of war. But scholars have also suggested that in principle, law could potentially be a very powerful tool to turn around some of the derogatory perceptions that still persist around children born of war. But would a recognition as victims of international crimes even be in the interest of children born of war? And if so, what should this look like? With my project, I aim to conduct the first intergenerational and cross-contextual study on the relevance of legal recognition for children born of war through interviews in Germany, Sierra Leone, and Iraq, to answer the question what role international law should play in the eyes of children born of war. And with that, I'll hand over to Johanna.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Johanne, and I am a doctoral researcher in political science at the University of Oslo, and I'm also part of the EuroWARCHILD project. In my project, I will look at the mobilization of children born of war in Norway, Denmark, and Kosovo, and I will look at how they have mobilized to have their rights achieved, both together and in groups. By having an intergenerational perspective, across conflicts and security settings, I am asking, what can we learn from the children born of war of today for the children born of war of the future? Previously conducted research has, as already been said, argued that these children have been stigmatized and are even considered security threats by their local communities. Still, these children are mobilizing and organizing themselves and sharing their stories. Today's panel is an example of that. In my research question, I am emphasizing that children born of war are mobilizing to have their rights recognized, both nationally, across borders, and internationally. They are also cooperating across generations and conflicts. Many children born of war never tell their stories, but there is a lot to learn from those who do. Thank you so much. I now give the word to Torunn.
Thanks to the whole team for really nice introductions. At least it gives us an idea of what this project is all about. My name is Torunn Tryggestad, and I'm the Deputy Director here at PRIO, but I'm also heading the PRIO Centre on Gender, Peace and Security, and we are a partner to this project, and we are really proud to be a partner to this project. There will be a panel now, because as Inger said, it's important for this project to communicate research and to collaborate with practitioners and policymakers. So the first panel today is put together by representatives from these stakeholder groups. But before we invite the panelists to the floor, we will hear from a special representative of the UN Secretary General, Pramila Patten. She is a special representative on conflict-related sexual violence. She was supposed to be here in person, but had to reschedule her travel plans, not least due to developments in Ukraine. But we are really happy that she still found time to make a pre-recorded statement for us, where she talks about, she will talk about how her office is working on this particular topic. Just a few words about her. She was appointed as a special representative of the Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict in April 2017. And prior to this appointment, and since 2003, Mrs. Patten served as member of the Committee on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, perhaps better known as CBOW. She was the chairperson of the working group on General Recommendation number 30 on women in conflict prevention, conflict and post-conflict situations. And she has been a member of several high-level panels and projects, including the high-level advisory group for the global study on the implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security. And she has been on the advisory panel for the African Women's Rights Observatory within the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. She previously was a commissioner of the International Commission of Inquiry into the massacre in Guinea-Conakry on the 28th of September 2009. And she is a national from Mauritius and is a practicing lawyer, or was a practicing lawyer before she entered into all of these different UN positions. So she's an impressive woman. So I think you will be the one to press the button so we can hear from Pramila Patten. So thank you for now.
Excellencies, distinguished conference participants. I would like to commend the PRIO Centre on Gender, Peace and Security, the Centre for Gender Studies at the University of Oslo, as well as the European Research Council for shining a spotlight on a neglected group of victims, children born of war. I would also like to extend particular gratitude to fellow panelists, Winfried Bello, Elna Johnson, and Lejla Daman. Without the courage and resilience of these individuals and others born of war, this issue may have slipped further into the shadows. Finally, I express my deep appreciation to Norway for its strategic leadership on women, peace and security during its tenure on the Security Council, and for ensuring that the issue of conflict-related sexual violence remains central to the work of the world's paramount peace and security body. Since I took office in 2017, I have sought to ensure that the needs and rights of children born of wartime rape are understood and upheld. In doing so, a critical priority of my mandate has been to bridge the academic policy gap and ensure evidence-based responses. Children born of war are acutely vulnerable and face unique, immediate, and long-term needs due to the circumstances of their birth. Since time immemorial, rape has been used to control women's sexuality, labor, and reproduction, to shred the social fabric, and to conquer territories and populations. Yet, the experience of children born of wartime rape came to the fore of public debate only in the 1990s. In Liberia, Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Uganda, and the former Yugoslavia, armed groups and forces use rape as a tactic of war to displace and dehumanize communities and forcibly impregnate women and girls. Such strategies, fueled by entrenched gender inequality, treat children born of rape as the next generation of an armed political, ethnic, or religious movement. These children are often perceived as affiliated with the parties to the conflict, provoking stigma and, in some cases, infanticide, abandonment, or other violations. Tragically, these trends continue to be documented today in conflict-affected settings, such as the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Iraq, Myanmar, Nigeria, and elsewhere. Such trends underscore the acute need for further research in this area as an evidence base for tailored responses. I am encouraged by the increased recognition among policymakers and academic and research institutions alike of the importance of this issue. It is clear that academic research, like the European Children Born of War project, can play a pivotal role in bringing into focus the risk and harms faced by children born of war and shaping public policy to ensure their protection. To date, national and international policymakers have largely overlooked the protection needs and indeed the very existence of children born of rape. In Rwanda, the law governing the Fund for Support and Assistance to Survivors of the Genocide does not recognize children born of rape among those entitled to relief. In Iraq, Libya, Somalia, Syria, and elsewhere, a child cannot be registered without the father's name. Lack of civil birth registration excludes children from vital services related to healthcare, education, and housing. Adults grappling with residual trauma often find few options for employment. In various field visits to IDP camps in Maiduguri, Nigeria, Goma, DRC, Darfur, Sudan, and South Sudan, I witnessed how the fate of these children is inextricably linked to that of their mothers. In Iraq, I visited shelters full of abandoned children, and women shared with me the pain and agony of having had no choice but to abandon their children. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, I met with adults who had been born from rape, and I realized the extent to which they suffer as a result of their mother's own stigmatization and discrimination. Clearly, because the initial violations had gone unacknowledged and unaddressed, there had been a cascade of harms passed from mother to child in an intergenerational cycle of the denial of human dignity and rights. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have sought to use the tools of my mandate to highlight firsthand the security and humanitarian challenges facing children born of rape. My office organized a series of events in the lead up to the milestone special report of the Secretary General on women and girls who become pregnant as a result of sexual violence in conflict and children born of sexual violence in conflict, which was prepared by my office. On 19th of June 2018, the focus of the International Day on the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict was on the plight and rights of children born of war. I invited Alan Muic, a young man from Bosnia who was born of wartime rape, to formally address the United Nations on his experience of growing up in a society profoundly polarized by war. In October 2018, my office co-organized an ARIA formula meeting on protecting children born of sexual violence in conflict zones, featuring Evelyn Amoni, a former forced wife of Joseph Kony, who gave birth to and raised children in the harrowing context of LRA captivity. Building on this, in 2019, I marked the 10-year anniversary of the establishment of my mandate through a survivors hearing, which highlighted stigma and poverty as critical challenges to the social reintegration of survivors of wartime sexual violence and their children. I am pleased that my advocacy initiatives informed the development of Security Council Resolution 2467 of 2019, which recognized for the first time that children born of sexual violence have rights, both connected to and distinct from their mothers. Resolution 2467 specifically mandated the special report on this subject prepared by my office in consultation with relevant UN system partners. Published in January, this report provided an opportunity to systematically review and consolidate United Nations knowledge and experience to date. Substantive input was provided by 24 United Nations field presences in consultation with national authorities, local civil society organizations, survivors networks, and international organizations. In addition, the 13 annual reports of the Secretary General on conflict-related sexual violence, compiled by my office since 2009, have consistently documented patterns and trends related to children born of conflict-related rape. To ensure a rights-based approach to the analysis and recommendations of this report, I signed frameworks of cooperation in 2018 and 2020 with the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and the Committee on the Rights of the Child. This collaboration led to a joint statement by the two committees issued on 19th of November 2021, outlining states' obligations under both conventions, including ensuring access to healthcare and education, the right to nationality, rehabilitation and reintegration, as well as efforts to combat stigma and social exclusion. In terms of findings, the report affirmed that the toxic combination of conflict dynamics and structural gender-based inequality excludes children born of conflict-related sexual violence from essential cultural and familial networks. This was evident in discriminatory naming practices, such as in Mali, where children were called rebel child or jihadist child. The report documented cases of transgenerational trauma where survivors lack support to raise children. Discriminatory birth registration practices exacerbate socioeconomic marginalization. Children born of wartime rape also face a heightened risk of statelessness and exploitation owing to discriminatory nationality laws and practices which urgently require reform. Women and girls who become pregnant as a result of rape often experience deep and abiding harm, especially those who are still children themselves. They are often unable to find work owing to gynecological injuries, sexually transmitted disease, psychological trauma, stigma, and ostracization. Left unaddressed, trauma and mental health challenges impede healing and socioeconomic reintegration. legislation and practices related to the inheritance and ownership of land and other property, which discriminate against women and girls, further marginalize survivors and their children, and deepen the feminization of poverty. Our research found that while few legal, policy, and operational responses currently address the rights and needs of children born of conflict-related rape, some promising approaches have emerged. In Nepal, for instance, the second National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, which is pending adoption, includes both survivors and children born of rape. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, more than 2 decades since the war ended, an association focused on the rights of persons born of rape launched the Name of One Parent campaign. This culminated in a change in administrative forms in several municipalities to require only one parent's name for the issuance of identification documents. Our review of peace and security initiatives indicated several critical gaps with respect to upholding the rights and meeting the needs of survivors who become pregnant and children born of conflict-related rape. Disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration programs have tended to characterize girls associated with armed forces as dependents without delving into the coercive and violent nature of their circumstances. Member states and mediators contributing to peace agreements should encourage provisions prohibiting conflict-related sexual violence and supporting increased access to redress and reintegration for survivors and children born of rape, as well as accountability for these crimes. Reinforcing justice and accountability presents particular challenges given the complex dynamics around children born of conflict-related rape. Crimes of sexual violence cause severe and enduring harm to survivors and reverberate through the lives of children, families, and communities. What is needed is an interconnected and interdependent application of judicial and non-judicial measures in coordination with peace and political processes. Yet, transitional justice processes rarely include children born of conflict-related rape. In Iraq, the Yazidi Survivors Law, adopted in March 2021, provides for transformative support to survivors of sexual violence, but stops short of recognition or benefits for children born of rape. A robust and comprehensive legislative framework is an essential foundation for justice. Last June, my office launched model legislative provisions and guidance on the investigation and prosecution of conflict-related sexual violence, which includes specific provisions related to children born of rape. Equally important, our engagement with civil society and full compliance with safety and ethical standards to respect confidentiality and uphold best practice standards. With respect to service provision, 2 critical points emerged from the special report. The first is the distinction between rights and needs. All children, regardless of the circumstances of their conception, have the same rights pursuant to the Convention on the Rights of the Child. These rights are indivisible and universal. Nonetheless, children born of conflict-related rape will often have specific needs. These may require additional support to ensure equitable access to services. Where children born of rape are separated from their families, abandoned, or left in the care of extended family members, additional complications and needs may arise. Multi-sectoral services, including psychological support, healthcare, and reintegration, are urgently needed. Secondly, in too many contexts, service provision is donor-dependent and limited to time-bound projects and programs which cannot meet the scale of the needs. Civil society actors in Mali have called for the full integration of children born as a result of rape in schools at the community level to ensure that they are not marginalized or at risk of radicalization and recruitment by armed and extremist groups. The report sets out a platform of concrete recommendations for the Security Council, member states, and donors as a basis for filling protection, assistance, and accountability gaps. As allegations of conflict-related sexual violence emerged in the context of war in Ukraine, I issued several public statements on the need for all parties to respect international law, protect civilians, and enhance anti-trafficking efforts. I also initiated discussions with the Ukrainian authorities, which culminated in a framework of cooperation, which I signed on 3rd of May with the Ukrainian Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration on behalf of the United Nations system. This framework includes measures to strengthen the rule of law and reinforce the capacity of the security and defense sector to prevent sexual violence. In early May, I traveled to Ukraine and the frontline refugee-receiving countries, Poland and Moldova, where I raised the issue of women and girls who become pregnant as a result of rape and children born of such violence. I stressed the need for multi-sectoral services, including sexual and reproductive health care. I have also called for accountability as a central aspect of deterrence, prevention, and non-repetition, as the failure to acknowledge and investigate past atrocities is the surest sign that violations will continue unabated. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that with our support, children born of rape in war can survive and thrive. They can overcome the horrific circumstances of their birth and have the hope of a brighter future in which they are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. I very much look forward to the findings of the EuroWARCHILD study, which include personal testimonies and first-hand perspectives. Listening to survivors and directly affected communities is key to ensuring that local realities guide the global search for solutions. Thank you.
As we heard from SRSG Patton, the issue of children born of war is a fairly new issue or agenda in the UN, and particularly maybe in the UN Security Council. So I think that leads me to, it's a nice segue into introducing Katrine Andersen, who is a policy director and special representative for protection of civilians in the humanitarian section of the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And she also holds a bachelor in political science from the University of Oslo and an MA in international law from SOAS in London. And you joined the ministry back in 2003. Mainly worked on humanitarian issue throughout your career in the MFA. So we are now eager to hear your thoughts and reflections on the keynote that we now just heard, and maybe also share some reflections on how Norway is approaching this topic, not least now as Norway is a member of the UN Security Council. So please.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I think this research that you have started is really key to understanding more about what type of solutions and what types of, for people, very practical problems that arise in them trying to lead their lives and pursue their futures. I think the SRSG outlined the complexity of this issue and how many parts of the UN system that is involved and how many parts of our own systems have to be involved to find solutions for the very practical problems that children born of war face in their lives. I think for us in the Security Council, it is a cross-section of two of our main priorities: protection of civilians and the women, peace and security agenda. On the protection of civilians side, we have child protection, children in armed conflict as one of our our main work areas of work. We lead the working group on children and armed conflict in the council. However, I would say that that mandate, the mandate on children and armed conflict, has its limitations when it comes to this issue. It certainly looks at let's say mothers who are minors are very much within that mandate, since sexual violence is one of the 6 grave violations committed against children. But the children themselves are not, let's say, specifically targeted in the mandate. However, I would say that children born of war are even more maybe at risk for the 6 grave violations, because they often lack the protection of their communities and are often on their own, isolated. So in that sense, the mandate for children in armed conflict is really key for the protection of these children. Secondly, I think there is an element that was mentioned, I think, in the introduction, where the focus is children born of rape. However, there are also other children born of war that are not a result of rape, but may face many of the same challenges. And I think this is maybe where your research can really broaden the understanding a little bit of this. Is more not only more than an issue related to violence. The human rights aspects of the problem is something that is outside, let's say, of the Security Council merely, but there are many other arenas in the UN and multilateral system where this needs to be brought up. The Committee for the Rights of the Child was mentioned. I think you also have the Special Representative of Violence Against Children has a key role here. I think our response, of course, we work in the council, but I'm not sure the Security Council is where this will where the great push will be. I think the push will be in the type of work that you will be doing, and also in the practical response. The response mounted by humanitarian organizations and human rights organizations, and within the development sector. I think the peace processes was mentioned. I think that's key. But I'll just mention a few things within the humanitarian response that I think is key. We work a lot on issues of documentation. We support organizations that push for birth registration, for example, which is a key document that really determines the rest of your life. If you don't have it, you don't exist. And this is not only a problem for children born of war, but it's a particular problem for children born of war. The mental health issues was mentioned. We need to continue to support a stronger mental health and psychosocial support response within the humanitarian sector. Another area is the whole issue around the missing, the restoration of family links. Very complex, but I think this is also where children born of war must have more attention to their rights and needs. What we have done is to join a UK initiative, a call to action for the rights and well-being of children born of war. And I think this is, it can become an interesting platform. It's still in the making, but it's something that can be something. For now, Bosnia, Kosovo, South Sudan, Guatemala, Mexico, Norway, and UK have come together. And we are working now to sort of build a platform for action, to see within our different areas of policy, on advocacy, spaces for children to work together, to meet, to say what they need, legal and policy frameworks, try to develop child-sensitive approaches within humanitarian and human rights and development responses. So this is in the making. I think it could be something. a bit more practical, let's say, and hands-on than some other initiatives. I'd also like to mention the UNHCR campaign against statelessness, where I think this group of children have a particular place. I think for us it's important to become a little bit practical, because what the research will help us do is to pinpoint what is actually going on. How is life for a child born of war in different contexts? And I think the organizations that children have formed themselves, particularly in Bosnia maybe, that I followed particularly, it's crucial. I mean, this is where we understand what is actually happening. What's the problem that we're trying to solve? And it also proves that the solutions have to be very local, because it's different systems, it's different cultures, it's different laws, and trying to understand the local context and trying to support a local solution to that. That's, I think, where we're trying to go. I'll stop there.
Can I just follow up briefly? Because you said that you don't think that the Security Council is where the push will happen. And myself, I've been working on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and I've seen how important it is for a normative framework to be developed and have resolutions adopted in the Security Council. Do you think it's difficult because of the topic, or is it more of the difficult situation, the lack of collaboration between the members of the Security Council now?
I think it's both. The push has to, of course, come from the outside. Nothing happens in the Security Council by itself. So the kind of advocacy and activism that is done by civil society organizations and states in the Council is really key. I think the topic is a bit complicated and a topic that is many would not like to, at least some would not like to discuss in depth. But it's not only when it comes to the issue of children born of war. We see it on the issue of children a lot. Because this notion that children are individuals with their own rights, that have their own agency, it's not straightforward. So there are some sort of hindrances into having that discussion in the way that we would like to have it. So that's why I'm saying it's not that it's impossible to do anything in the Security Council, and I completely agree that if you can do something good in the Council, it has an impact. But I think it's a little bit slow at the moment and difficult. But that doesn't mean that we will not keep pushing for it or keep trying to address it and have countries that come after us in the Council, we will try to influence them to do the same. But it really has to come very firmly from the outside, collective community of multilateral organizations, states, civil society, pushed together to get the Council to act on the issue.
Speaking of civil society and advocacy and activism, we are extremely happy to have Gunvor Knag-Fylkesnes here in the panel. She is the Advocacy and Communication Director at Save the Children in Norway. And before joining Save the Children in 2011, she worked at NORAD, and she has been working for a number of civil society organizations here in Norway, including the Norwegian Refugee Council and the Norwegian Church Aid. She has also been very centrally involved in co-authoring a series of reports on grave violations against children in conflict, the so-called Stop the War on Children reports, where PRIO has also contributed with data and statistics, which I think has been really important. We are so happy to have you here. For a Norwegian audience, I think you are quite well known for being a very strong advocate for children's rights in the public. And you have also been a very strong critic and advocate for the rights of the so-called ES children, the Norwegian children born of foreign fighters. So we are really curious to hear now your take on the SRSG's keynote, and maybe share some reflections on the work that Save the Children is involved in.
Yeah, thank you so much for this really nice introduction, I must say. And first of all, congratulations on this really, really important research project. I can't stress it enough. It is so important. I'm sure that this will generate a lot of important information that will also help us as civil society actors to fight for the rights of children born of war. So it's extremely important. I really, in particular, really find it so interesting that you also have this cross-generational focus from World War II, the Bosnian War, as well as the European children born, or children of foreign fighters. So I think it's, I'm really looking forward to see how this evolves. And I also hope that we can collaborate more on particular topics. And I think also this project becomes, you know, depressingly so more relevant due to the war in Ukraine, where we see that sexual violence seems to be used systematically as a weapon of warfare. So we must be prepared really to see that a substantial number of children born of war comes out of the Ukrainian war. And I think Save the Children, we have been working on children born of war since the very start for more than 100 years in different contexts and different conflicts. It's very much sort of part of our mandate. Every child, all children have the same rights, no matter who their parents are, really. And I think Patton really gave a really good explanation of sort of the complexity, as Catherine said, and also Catherine also covered a lot of some of my topics that I was about to tell you. So, and also initially in their introduction, I think the fact that the Parliament, it took them 57 years to apologize for how they treated children born of war during Second World War is really a disgrace. And referring to the situation of the children born of foreign fighters, I really do hope that the Parliament does not spend another 57 years to apologize for how they are treating the children now trapped in northeast Syria. I think maybe I'll spend some time telling you about how we work, in particular with the children of foreign fighters now held in detention camps in northeast Syria. There are some children who have been repatriated to countries, but most of them are still in northeast Syria. I think there's one work going on now with Human Rights Watch that I think you might find interesting, where they are interviewing children and caregivers to the children that have been repatriated to Europe and to see how they are doing now. So just mentioning that. So as you may know, there is up to 37 children being held in these detention camps in northeast Syria. Out of 8,000 of them are children of foreign fighters other than Iraq. So it's quite a substantial number of children from Europe in northeast Syria now. And as you also may know, these children are really deprived of their rights, very basic human and child rights, the right to freedom, the right to education, the right to safety, and the right to survive, because we see that hundreds every year do die because either they are killed or they die because of illnesses that easily can be treated if they had access to proper medical care. So I think, and also the risk of fire, including deliberate arson, is also one of the highest risks to get injured and die for children in the camps. And there is a lack of water in general, and the sanitary conditions are really horrible. And UN itself has described this as sort of a torture-like, that these children, they live in torture-like conditions. And for us, working in these camps, we do work on education and health, and we do also have a temporary center for orphans. We also talk to these children every day. So we hear their voices and we document them, which I also think maybe you could find interesting. I think in particular the children that do not have any or are orphans in these centers, it's kind of doing detective work. We try to find the relatives in their home countries and through very little information. And we have managed to repatriate quite a few number of children to both Russia, Canada, Norway, UK. But it's a sort of very difficult detective work that we have to do. And I just wanted to also give you some examples of what the children themselves tell us. There's one girl, 14-year-old, she told us that she has nothing to do in the camp and worries that her life is simply wasting away. She wants to go home because there is so much she wants to do and achieve in her life. When am I going to start to live? She asked when we interviewed her. Another girl, 11 years old, she told us that I cannot endure this life anymore. We do nothing but wait. The only place where I can come and do different things is this site, Save the Children site. But sometimes Hassan, my nephew, and I beg my mother to pretend that she is ill so we can go to the hospital and play with seesaws and slides. And Mariam was later reported killed, her mother injured, and Hassan disappeared during an unsuccessful escape attempt from the camp in a water truck. So I think these two statements, they tell a lot about the children born of war, how they are really discriminated against, really deprived of their rights because security trumps children's rights. We see their mothers as threats and therefore also the children. And countries do not then want to repatriate their own children. And I think this is a disgrace, really. So we'll continue to advocate for these children. Of course, we see some developments. We see that some are repatriated to their countries, but still, more than 1,000 days of these children's childhood has now been wasted away, and they are traumatized, and they need particular attention when they are repatriated to their countries. And when it comes to Norway, I think, as Katrine said, yes, this is a difficult topic for the Security Council because many of the members, including Norway, they still have children in these camps. Russia is, in fact, the country that has repatriated a lot of their children, and Russia has challenged the other states to do more. So it's sort of a very tense discussion in the Security Council. But we still do challenge the government of Norway, the political leadership in the MFA, to really take the first steps, repatriate the rest of the four children, Norwegian children left, and also challenge the other states in the Security Council on this issue. Maybe not, there will be achieved a lot in the Security Council, but it's one very important arena to try at least. So just to end, I really do hope that this research project gives us, lots of valuable information, both on how it's really good that, children born of war views and experiences are at the center of the project. It's really, really good. So I really do hope that this information will give us even more knowledge and so this can really help us advocate further for children born of war. And children of foreign fighters is one example of that.
Thank you so much, Gunvor. It's clearly a very difficult situation for the children you were describing, and it's also politically very sensitive, not only in the Security Council, but even here in Norway. We had a crisis of government with the previous coalition government, and one of the parties left actually when some of these children were repatriated. I will not put you, Katrina, on the spot. You are not representing the government, but is there anything you would like to comment on Gunvor's reflections?
I think what Gunvor is describing is really goes back to the point that was made at the outset here, the securitization of the whole issue, which really is not helpful at all. So I think what you can do and what we can continue to do is to focus on what we work on, which is protection of children and children's rights. We had an event during the Protection of Civilians Week in the UN last week on urban warfare and the particular effects on children. And the message is loud and clear, coming to us and coming to other states from ICRC, the head of ICRC, who was our keynote speaker, together with the SRSG for Children in Armed Conflict. So the messages is coming across very clearly. And the rights of children, the sort of the independence of children and their rights is coming through very strongly. And we'll just have to continue working on that. The work of Save the Children, really key. Save the Children was co-sponsoring the event for us, which we really appreciate. The voices of children. We had a child from Yemen, she's a youth from Yemen, speaking very clearly and very on a very sophisticated level, I must say, on her realities, on her what she wants. And I think this is really what guides us. So we'll just have to keep trying to give platform for those voices. And this is, I think, maybe where the call to action maybe can help us to work with SAVE and other organizations and like the organization from Bosnia, led by children and youth themselves, to really speak out about what do they want. So that's our guide, not necessarily what everybody else wants.
This session is now coming to a close, unfortunately. I'm sure that there are many in the audience who would like to ask questions, but maybe there will be a little bit of time for that towards the end. But just briefly, we hear a lot of reports now of rapes being committed in Ukraine, and also pregnancies. To what extent is this now a topic that you are discussing in the humanitarian responses in the ministry and with partner countries?
It is absolutely a central part of our discussion with humanitarian partners. How to mount a humanitarian protection response to this issue, and the health response, of course. Also, trafficking issues is a huge problem at the moment. So absolutely, it is central to our discussions. However, it's very difficult to mount a proper response to that. But we have good partners that have experience and that work well on this issue. But it's particularly in some of the most violent and besieged areas, the access to people in need is very difficult. But of course, this is an acute emergency response, and then it's a long term. So we need to build both at the same time.
Thank you so much. We will now have a 10-minute break to reorganize and prepare for the next panel. So those of you listening online, stay tuned. We will start again at 11. But before we break for the break, give a hand to the two panelists. Thank you so much, Katrina and Gunvor.
She was adopted by two British journalists who brought her back to the United Kingdom. She was 19 when she began her activism and working for and with many different NGOs. The Forgotten Children Born of War, that has been mentioned today, but also WARCHILD, to highlight the issues around sexual violence that women and their children face. And she currently lives in Manchester, but regularly goes to Bosnia, and where she, after 23 years, made a connection with her birth mother, and they started a journey building a relationship together. Welcome. Elna Jonsson, born August 1943 in a home for women pregnant by German soldiers and given the name Gisela. She was adopted and her name was changed to Elna Marit. I'm sure you will share more about this with us to this story. In 1986, her biological mother called her and told her she was her mother and that her father was a German soldier. That phone call changed your life, Elna, and you have been an active board member of the Norwegian WARCHILD Association and also the War and Children Identity Project, located and set up in Bergen at that time. Then, finally, Dr. Norman Mukasa, one of the group who is not a child born of war himself, but who is an international and intercultural studies scholar affiliated with the Mutisa Royal University and the Bugema University in Uganda, and is currently a visiting researcher at GISIS in Cologne. His research is focusing, amongst others, on the children born of war in Uganda, so he will share with us the knowledge and the experience of the children born of war, primarily children born by female child soldiers in the context of the Lord's Resistance Army. Welcome, all of you, to the panel today. As you know, and those of you who have seen the program, we are trying to focus and concentrate on 3 different questions. And I would like to start with you, Winfried. Now, we've heard the Undersecretary General talking about children born of sexual violence, and now focusing very much on this being a topic from the 1990s on. Well, now we all heard the very brief introduction to your history, and obviously this is not a new topic. So, you know, what was it like for you to grow up as a child born of war, if I may?
It was difficult, of course, but I can't separate my fate with the fate of my mother. So you told something about me. I would add something about my mother. She lived in Königsberg. Today it's Kaliningrad. And when my second sister was born, her husband visited her in the hospital, and he said, I will not come back. I say goodbye to the Eastern Front. And one important sentence, you should not marry again. And then he left her for Russia. 6 months later, he died. Okay, Kaliningrad was destroyed in 1944, and my mother went back to the farm of her parents. And then a young soldier came in 1945 who raped her, and she became pregnant. She tried abortion, you mentioned it, with simple means, because there was no medical care in this area, and they tried with what they learned from the old bitches in the medieval area. So I was born in April 1946, and when she gave birth to me, she turned away and shouted, I throw the Rusek against the wall. Or better, I throw it against the wall. Rusek is a special name for bastards, from Russian bastards, for example. However, she refused the offer of her sisters to take me over. And 3 months later, she went on the run to the west, together with one sister, my siblings, 2 girls, and me. I was 3 months of age. In the West, I experienced the next 12 years normally. I didn't know what a bastard was. I didn't know why I had a guardian. And teachers sometimes questioned me so strangely. I remember some events in school, and I sat in a colloquium, teachers around me, and asked me something about my father, who died in 1942. And I was lucky because I didn't know nothing about that. In my neighborhood, there were lots of fatherless children, fathers who died in 1945, just a few days before the war ended. And I wondered why there was such a long period between the death of my father in 1942 and my birth in 1946. And that's a little bit funny. I found in a medical book the word afterbirth. And I was satisfied, okay, I'm a case of afterbirth, not knowing. If you don't want to know something, you will not know it. You can repress it or something else. So during those 12 years, my mother had to deal with many problems. In my birth certificate, I was given her maiden name. And 2 years later, mother changed it to her husband's name, and that's why we all have the same family name. Mother had to apply for social welfare, and this was a torture for her. She had to describe the facts of the rape again and again, and she had to listen to nasty comments. You have had your fun, for example, and now you want money for that bastard. She refused this procedure, and for at least 2 years, I received no financial support, had no medical care. When we have to go to the dentist, we have to pay for ourselves. And 10 years after the war, a new law came out to support me as a war victim. And the name of my file was war damage, the same as my mother would have lost a cow, a car, or something else. I was a war damage. One day after my 13th birthday, my mother told me briefly that I'm a Soviet child. In the days, some years ago, I said Russian child, but it's not correct. Soviet child is better because maybe my father is from Ukraine or from Mongolia. Once my mother said, "Oh, I'm happy that he has not got the Asian eyes." So my mother never spoke to me about this topic until she died in the age of almost 103. And my mother-in-law also died 5 days before, also in the age of 103. So I've good genes, but I made a gene test with Heritage some months ago, and it's clear my genes are from Ukraine, Russia, and in the eastern area, around about 65%. And there's also a little part from Finland. I don't know why. So for me began a 50-year period of shame, of collecting information in files. I learned that I was a war damage, not wanted, not the result of love. And this word, war damage, made me cry over and over again. I was not meant to be in this world. I wished for a father, had mental problems, depression, and suicidal phases. I also very rarely talked about my background. My self-esteem was low, and I felt inferior and had a lot of questions. I think I stop here, and when I changed my life, it's another story.
Thank you very much for sharing this with us, and we will come back to the continuing of the story. I will move to you now, Erna, because when you hear the story and the life history of Winfred, yours is different, as I also said briefly in the introduction. But on the other hand, you, due to your work in the organization, you've probably seen a lot of diverse experiences, even though most of those children were born of consensual relationships, or?
Yes, that's true. Well, my life, it was a great silence. A thick wall of silence. I was the only child. I had nice, kind, adopted parents with a great secret among them. They did not talk about it. That was my origin. And did not talk about it or forbid our family also to talk about it. At 15, I couldn't provide a birth certificate for the preparing for the confirmation. And the priest asked me if I was adopted. And I said, I don't know, but you can find out for me. And, he said he can do that without talking to my parents. Why don't you do that? I said. I tried myself, but then my mother trembled with her lips and asked if I don't love them anymore. And he never did. So, and at the same time, or in the same period, I also asked our family doctor if he knew anything about that story, or my story, or my parents' story. And he said, you are too young. When you are 18, I shall tell you about it. And when I was 18, I was heavenly in love. And the matter wasn't so important anymore. And I married shortly after. I went on with my life and got 2 boys and was divorced at 22. I met my husband, Kjell, and he was a widower with 2 children. And we bought a house and moved together. But then, when I was 43, an evening, a Friday afternoon, I got a phone call from a woman. She cried in the telephone, and she told me she was my mother. And she also told that my father was a German soldier. I knew that she was telling the truth. I don't doubt it at all. And that phone call changed my life, really. And at first, I couldn't talk about it at all to anyone. And later, I couldn't talk about anything else. It was just maniac. And I was also desperate to find out about what Lebensborn were, what are my birth papers, my birth certificate, what was this orphanage, that Lebensborn home. And then I met the silence again. The archive was closed. Nobody could or would tell. A lot of people tried to help, but in vain. I joined NKBF in the 90s, and I thought maybe NKBF was the WARCHILD association that was started a few years before. Maybe they knew more than I did. They didn't. But they were just as interested to find out as I was. So we did a really hard job to find out. And money was out in the paper and asked for people who knew anything more, and we got plenty of contacts, and we learned really much. And we also got a very good contact, Kåre Olsen, at the Riksarkiv. Hva heter det på engelsk? No, never mind. Yeah, and then in '95, then it was a celebration for the 50 years after the wars ended, and then Stein Ugelvik Larsen was sitting there. He took contact with me and offered the war children to have a alternative celebration in the Goethe Institute. And we did, and that was a very impressive and nice evening. And everybody talked about their situation as war child. And for many, it was the first time they did so in public, because it was a shame. It was a shame to be a Tyskerunge, a German child. So then Larsen founded this war child identity project together with me. And we have a nice time, and we learned a lot. And we had a lot of work. And we worked together, I think, for about 5, 6, 7 years, I think. Yes. And in about 2005 or 6, we hadn't any money anymore. So it's slept away. Yeah. And yes.
Could you say something about when you said that you got together and you met and many of them spoke up and you said publicly? I mean, they probably, you were still not public, it was more like in a closed forum when you, but what were the stories? So,
the story,
you know, because when they were more consensual and loved, you know, do you have this idea that when they're love affairs, that's no issues for the child? And we know from a lot of the research in Norway that that has happened in the meantime, that is actually quite different. And so could you share some of the
Yes, I can try. In Norway, it was a 5-year occupation. And the young men were there for many years, lived in small communities, often in the house. They were offered house in private homes, rooms in private homes, and then learn to know the girls. And they were very they were nice, they were polite, they were treated also in this private environment. And on the other side was the leader, the war, and very, very many relationships. My parents, for example, were engaged to be married for 2 years. She met in 41, and I was born in 43. But they wasn't allowed to. They have to search for that by the German authorities. And many was in that situation. I only heard about one who was conceived by rape, only one. And he was punished by the Germans. Also, so it was, but usually we fought to find out. Also, everyone in this union, we was about 600 members in all, and that's only half of the German child population that we know about. So I think these who was interested in that association, that was war children that was looking for something, looking for their family, or had met their family and had a deep need to talk about it, because it was very emotional and deep felt, yes. And so it was always for me. I have met my families, both my mother and my father, and I grew up as the only child, and suddenly I have 6 sisters and brothers, 3 in Germany and 3 in North Norway, and I know all of them. I have a good relationship to all of them, yes. But what I wanted to tell is that many of these children that they told me, the other children told me, it was terrible stories. Yes, it was stories about the young girl who hated to stay when they had geography in the classroom, and they have and they spoke about Germany. She had to stand up and was ashamed to be that treatment of a little girl who was ashamed, who had tried to shield that he was a German child. That was a terrible thing to do for this teacher. And also other mistreats, sexual violence and so on in own family, and also this great silence many have experienced, not about their origin. It shouldn't be talked about. They know, maybe they know it themselves, but nobody else should know. So, yeah.
Yes, well, I guess that big silence is something that characterizes a lot of the cases and incidents we know cross-country and also in the intergenerational context. Leila, you said too partly the silence, and you have also gone on a big search. Would you want to share your story with us?
Yeah, definitely. So I was born in '92, and my birth mother was was raped and kind of held captive early '90s, so April of '92, so at the beginning of the start of the war. And she was released when she was so heavily pregnant, and she managed to make her way to at the hospital in Sarajevo, which is where she kind of gave birth to me. Now, at the same time as all of this is going on, my adoptive parents, so my parents, were journalists at the time. My mum was the camerawoman, my dad was the journalist, and they were doing reports of the early kind of what's coming out of Bosnia, the early kind of the rape camps, but also what's happening kind of out there. And they came across my story because I was born on Christmas Day, and I suppose for the audience back home at Christmas, you know, I was one of the first children to be coming out as a child born out of sexual violence within the Bosnian conflict. And my dad interviewed my birth mum, and this is footage that I'd see much later on in my life, so when I was around 19. And you know, my adoptive parents, my parents decided, you know, I think 5 days later, and I don't know how this works, but that they had to do something, that they had to take me out, you know. And they smuggled me out in an armoured car and took me to Hungary because they had kind of their base there. And basically, my dad had to go back and work because Sky News didn't know anything about this, so they had to keep the footage coming. And they'd got all, like my birth mum at the time had said she was more than happy for me to be given up for adoption. Some government officials were there, so there were papers. Obviously, those papers went missing because it was at the beginning of the war, so there was no papers afterwards. And you know, that was really where it all began. And then I grew up in the UK, so eventually we moved back to the UK. My parents' family are all British, and I started living my life there. But my parents always kept me in close contact with Bosnia and letting me know that I was adopted. But I do remember, I think it was a bit like your experience of school. And children talk, and they were talking about what day of the week you were born. So I went and asked my mother, and this is where I really remember. If I had been told before, I hadn't remembered, but this is where I really remember. You know, where parents sit you down, so you know something difficult's coming. You predict it's going to be bad, otherwise they wouldn't behave in the way they did. And she told me, you know, that I was adopted and that my birth mum couldn't look after me because there was a war in Bosnia. Never heard of Bosnia, didn't quite understand, but I do remember very vividly, still to this day, that there was a sinking feeling. There was this feeling of, you are different. Like this is what this means to you. And growing up in the UK, obviously, had, as much as it is multicultural, many of the people were British, many of my school peers hadn't heard where Bosnia was, so I really didn't talk about it at all because I didn't want to have to talk about adoption or Bosnia because I didn't know where it was. I couldn't quite understand what I was dealing with, and this kind of went on for quite a long time. But I do feel like that conversation, that level of feeling different, really did impact me very greatly going into my teen years, like especially. And then my parents got some information of, you know, my birth mum's name, and you know, so I had a look at my birth certificate. I think this was when I was about 14, and I put her name into Google, and then articles came up about rape and, you know, all of these things, and I was like, is this me? Like, is this? So she'd done some research or done some interviews with, you know, people post the war, but I was like, oh, it might not be me. It might be a really common name, but I genuinely, you know, where you know that this is you, and And I didn't say anything to my adoptive parents. So when I came of age, 18, they decided to sit me down again and tell me that I was born of rape, except I was sort of prepared for the conversation because I'd already known, like, or already thought about it. But the thing that I had really, really struggled with was that I didn't know anyone else. There didn't seem to be a lot in the children. There, you know, I typed in children born out of rape. There wasn't that much out there. No kind of forums, helpline, community, you know, anything. So then you're really worried that I genuinely thought for a very long time, until I met Ina and until I was put in touch with Ina through researchers, that I was the only one. I remember writing back to this researcher and saying, you know, oh, so there are others. And I was like, God. But for me, I think the hardest part was, you know, the hardest part has been, you know, the lack of belonging, the lack of understanding, like, where do you fit in? My name is Layla, it's spelt with a J. So in the UK, people know that I'm not from England, or there's a connection there. So then it's like, but when I've gone back to Bosnia, I don't speak Bosnian, so I don't fit in necessarily. So it's like, you're not Bosnian enough, you're not British enough. It's how do you hold that identity, or how do you hold two, especially when a lot of the time people want to know which one you kind of feel more about. The journey about meeting my birth mum was, I went to the Bosnian embassy in the UK, and I told a lady there about my story, and I said that I have the name. Is there any chance of, you know, kind of, is there a census or something where, you know, that you guys can find out? And I heard nothing for about 3 months, and then I get a letter sent through my door saying, we've found your birth mum. We sent a police officer around to check that she is who she is. It's like, great, really sensitive. And she has confirmed that that's the case. Here's her mobile number or house phone number, and this is her address. And so I said, and I spoke to my parents, and she said she'd be happy to, like, if I was like, I'll write letters, because phone conversations, it's not going to be a non-starter, and I'd write it in English, and then the lady from the embassy would translate it into Bosnian, so there was no, because I was really worried there'd be misinterpretation through the letters. You know, words are, it's quite hard to gauge if you're not communicating with someone face to face. And so this is where we started 4 years of kind of letter communication. And, you know, this is really how it all began. And there was so much emotion every time, you know, the letter would come, and post, it takes quite a long time to get there. And, you know, you'd be hanging on because you're not sure what's happening on the other side. You're not sure how you are making someone else feel, especially when that person is your mother. And it wasn't until I was, you know, 23 when I met Ina, so the president of the Forgotten Children of War Association in Bosnia. We met at age 23 after being put in touch, and I was talking to her about, you know, my story, but also having done advocacy back in the UK with WARCHILD and the Ending Sexual Violence and Conflict Summit. I was like, I'm really talking about this issue, but I've not met anyone else on my journeys that is born out of sexual violence, or not that they're willing to talk about it. And she was just amazing. She was like, well, we should just go turn up. We should go meet your birth mum. And so we arranged to meet my birth mum and her family, so her sister and my half sister from a different marriage post-war. And my parents came out, which I found very surreal because they'd met all those years ago. And Ina translated the whole kind of meeting. So we all sat on a sofa. And, you know, there was just a lot in the atmosphere, so much. I was the last one to go through the door, which I feel like was so nerve-wracking. And then my birth mother standing in front of me. And we just looked at each other, and it's just unbelievable. It was an unbelievable experience for sure. And then also it's like, how do we then continue that relationship and that journey? Because I knew it was never going to just be like one time and that's that, thanks, you know. But what does that look like going forward? But I tell you, like, we have continued our relationship, and I go back, and every time I'm there, I visit. but there is real pain and unresolved trauma in the room, like in the room, and it's something that it's the silence. So she wants to remain anonymous and wants, you know, everything to, you know, her story to not be told, which is understandable, but we've never spoken about it. You know, I asked her a question for the first time the last time I went back in December, and that is after 5 years, because we'll talk about everything else, but not that. Like, what's your favorite color? What, you know, but the elephant in the room is what's happened. And it's just not discussed. And from a perspective, and it's really hard because obviously as a child born out of conflict, you want to know your story because you will make up other ones otherwise, you know, and the stories you make up, sometimes worse than knowing the truth. And that is so hard, but also you don't want to re-trigger, re-traumatize, and there's a reason why those stories aren't being told. But there is that kind of barrier within the silence of that kind of connection, because if you're talking about everything else and you're not talking about this, and it's not that I need to know every detail of you know, everything that's gone on, but you know, there are certain things that, you know, there's a reason why I'm here, there's a reason why we're here and we're meeting, and we're not able to kind of go into that at all. And so that's caused me, and I think that has really caused me a lot of kind of a real struggle, real sense of feeling very uncomfortable growing up. And for me, like, the only way that I've managed to kind of the only way I've managed to move forward within all of this is I find the activism in some ways very cathartic, like what you were saying about speaking. You know, you want to speak, because I genuinely did believe that I was the only child born out of conflict for about 23 years, and that level of isolation no one should have to experience. And I think it's also just really highlights, it's great that there are projects like this that have started, because you know, I've been campaigning since I was 19 and it wasn't really discussed then, you know.
Thank you so much, Leila. I think there are many issues. I'd like to come back to some of them also later, but it proves that the importance also of the organizations and the networks that you, the bottom-up networks that you've established. Norman, you're here, as I said in the introduction, not as a child born of war, but rather as someone who knows about the children born of the child soldiers in northern Uganda, where, as far as I know, there are no organizations, and but still it's been a long conflict with many children born of war, and so maybe we can move to the question, and you probably recognize some of the similar things from your research that have been addressed already. What would be the main kind of human rights issues that one would need to take into account for the children born of war, if you would summarize it from the case of the children born of the LRA, if that's possible at all?
Yeah, but I beg maybe to give a little bit of how I get into this topic, because as they spoke, and my kind of what has been, how do I fit into this discussion when the colleagues are giving the real experiences. And I want to share my experience of contacting and landing onto what I didn't know at the time was child mothers and then children born of war. And I think I will give it just a few minutes, and if it's okay. Yeah. So I was doing my fieldwork research for the PhD, and I moved to northern Uganda in 2013. And my interest was to look at the post-conflict situation in northern Uganda, because after 2 decades of war, people had moved into IDP camps. And I wanted to see the gender issues and how people were coping. And then I visited then a school, Padel Girls Academy, because I was told, and I had read, that they have young children who were returning from South Sudan and other parts of Uganda because they were forced wives of the commanders and other abducted children born of war. So I meet in that school young girls, many of them in the age of 16, not much beyond 25. And I had the opportunity to interview about 11 of them. And what came to my understanding at that point was I was dealing with a totally complex situation because these girls were telling stories with their matron, and they came in groups accompanying each other of how they were abducted, how the LRA kind of formed the certain family arrangements in which they were forced into forced marriages. So it involved, of course, sexual violence. It involved them to be sometimes involved as porters, to be involved in the war. So it was a very complex scenario. But bottom line there was the school had started as a small project of a lady who had a Christian motive to help those girls do something. So it was like a vocational baking a school. And so she took them on with their children. So because they didn't know how to look after children, they were kids in that setting. So then I finished the PhD, and I think I contacted Ingvild about that. I said, oh, Norman, this is a group of children born of war. And I've been working on this for a long time, and I didn't know. So thereafter, I published an article on this, and my experience on understanding the children born of war at that time was through the mothers. And it has been so for some good time until today that the group, this is one of, that's why I carried this book, because it details all the stories, and I think Evelyn has met many people. She has spoken publicly, I think, and she formed an organization called Women Advocacy Network. Also, kind of, it is also part of another organization, Justice and Reconciliation Project, which is doing a lot in the policies, pushing issues, including the issue of the citizenship and getting identification for children born of war. But that's now entering into the answers of what I expect would be to do with the rights. So my interaction through the literature and also interaction with the people working on this at a policy level is that there's little known about the children themselves, and more is known at the moment in Uganda about the mothers. First, in terms of how the designing of the truth and the reconciliation processes were, which was that the DDR, the disarmament and demobilization and reconciliation, and the projects that came after were meant to address and find justice and accountability for these groups who were involved. But the main beneficiaries in this case were through the amnesty, those commanders and child soldiers who were returning. So they could either get into the army or they got a package of benefits. And the returning mothers, who are now the people I dealt with, many of them, more than half, did not pass through the reception centers. They walked direct to their homes. And there, they would either, the mothers of these children, either go to their parents with the kids, and that introducing them into a community without any formal integration. Others had run into cities for the identity issue to keep within a bigger group, and there were single mothers. That comes with the challenges of poverty, because they are struggling and starting afresh with life. with risks of living in the urban centers and other insecurities. Then we have the other mothers who again would get new partners, and these children then could be taken on as their stepchildren. So all these dynamics and the naming of the children, many of which depicted the troubles the mothers had gone through, and many of the mothers saying that they wouldn't then want their children to know about the story. So for me, one thing is the children have a right to respect, and this in regards to family as well. And they need a right to to benefit some form of accountability from, for example, in the case of Uganda, the government needs to take accountability, and so that they can benefit from education, which at the moment, given their circumstances, is one of the challenges. Healthcare, of course, and what we talk about here is broad. So I would think in terms of the psychosocial support, which should be available to them, which is not. And of course, other forms, such as the mothers today have this organization, and they are able to use dialogue and to meet other groups. They have moved to Nigeria to meet the children of the Boko Haram and the mothers. They have been to South Sudan. So that kind of engagement is also the voice. It's their right to have a voice, but the protection and social protection. So I think they may have better experiences there, but I think what other right, and that is the issue of state and their registration. At the moment today in Uganda, the minister and the department in charge of identification agreed that in the budget of 2019-2020, they were going to have finances for registering the children born of war. My issue is, how will they be registered? Because there was a survey of an organization where the government was interested in knowing how many children born of war could we have. And the statistics are never very exact. But they got a number of 6,000, but earlier on, there were published numbers to a rate of between 20,000 children born of war. But the recent that the government kind of takes to be is that of 6,000. So they will take care of a budget to register them.
Well, at least that's some kind of progress. So if I summarize now, so the human rights that you see at risk in particular also for the children born of war are many of those that are laid down in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which actually should have been taken appropriate care of. So poverty, education, health, psychosocial support, and basic kind of citizenship, which has been addressed by you others too. Is there any other basic human rights any of you others, Winfred or Elna and Laila, would like to address in addition before we move on to the final question on the list that you would like to emphasize? That yes.
Because there were many points in my life which triggered me badly. Even the word father at church triggered me to make me cry. When we prayed Father in Heaven, it was really bad. And so I would need psychological support. And the other point is more rights for me, for the kid, and for the mother to legally terminate the pregnancy. Yes, I live today, but makes this the world different? I think no. So if my mother would have been successful, it wouldn't bother me today. Of course, financial support, education is one point. And also the German government should declare today we have failed on these issues, because all those women were treated badly in the first years after the war. There were the old Nazis in the officials, and they treated a lot of women and maybe sometimes commit suicide because of that. I was going to commit suicide too when I was really young, but you see, I survived.
I would like to pinpoint, here in Norway, it was a really big problem to find their parents. It was a big problem to get access to the archives. And if we got, after a long fight, there was also a big problem to find the parents. Also, we didn't got any help from the officials. So we have to use private researchers and friends, and we try ourselves to find. Also, I mean that it should be a right for every child to know their biological problems, to get help, to have that right, and also right to help to find them. That, I mean, is very important, yes. And it was at least important for us. And I also means, also, if it is possible, of course, that is an inheritance right from both their parents. Yes, if they're not legally adopted, then it's a different case. But after the law, in the society where they grew up, they have to be treated or given the same basic rights as everybody else. That's so simple.
I just want to say that I echo that 100%. I think there were certain things, so like I needed more psychological care and community-based involvement rather than necessarily like financial or support, because I had my adoptive parents. But you know, it's about basic rights. This is basic human rights, and some will lean on others more than others, but these should be kind of free for everyone to have. And strengthening the legal system and the policy frameworks, they should be built in at the beginning, not a kind of add-on thought later on. And I think that's like super important when it comes to actually building the policies. Who are you building the policies for, and have you had a discussion with them in the beginning to find out what their needs are? Because I feel like a lot comes top down, and it sometimes doesn't quite fit, or it's not what they need, And I think that's really important, is finding out what the needs of the children are, from the children, yes, 100%.
Which is, of course, so essential, and and whereas the researcher can say, if you hadn't been talking, we wouldn't have even had the information and the data that we have today. Which is basing and forming much of what our recommendations also for the evidence-based policy implementations also are. So if we then move on to this question, and you addressed it, and maybe take it in a kind of a more broader context of what we heard of the other speakers and the other panelists. So we do have civil societies working, established by the children born of war themselves, obviously existing, like in Norway, Denmark, they've just closed down, but they were active for 40 years, over and over again, trying to get the topic on the agenda. So we do have civil societies, we do have organizations in recent years, also at the international level, Amnesty, Save the Children. I always say it's not all started by them, it's basically was started by the children born of war themselves. At the same time, you have it from the issue at the responsibility level. So where you now addressed also, Leila said, but you need the legal and the policy framework. So can it be the civil society and the children born of war that are the ones to kind of make sure that the rights of the children born of war are maintained, or isn't that rather something that clearly needs a setting at an international level where these children's rights are taken seriously? We've been working to get an amendment to the CRSV for a long time, focusing particularly on the children born of war. But I do believe this is not something that we as civil society can do without the support of, for example, the Security Council. So how do we go next? What do we do? We know a lot. There are a lot of people involved. We've got the topic of the agenda. What should be the next step going beyond talk?
There are movements now like Fridays for Future, movements like Me Too. And the problem of children born of war is that the neighbors are a problem, and your own family seems to be the bigger problem, because they don't accept the rape and the child. And the society should be educated and teach women and children are not to blame. The behavior and the attitude are hard to change, but we need to start changing. And once a psychologist called me a bridge builder. I would like to build bridges to other affected people, to other children born of war, also to Russia. Maybe 1 million Russians exist, fathered by the German soldiers in rape and in a love affair. Stalin tried to extinguish their fates by giving them a new identity, and that's where I would like to build a bridge. 2 years ago, a Russian magazine reported about my group Thistle Flowers, and 2 Russians wrote to me and asked to find the German relatives. They know we have relatives in Germany, and I'm very proud that it was relatively easily to find these relatives in Germany. But one of the questions came from Ukraine, from Charkov, and the other one from the middle of Russia. But it was possible to build bridges, and build bridges to other children born of war, because most of them, common is that everybody kept this as a secret, and they were silent for many, many years. In the German Democratic Republic, the Russians were the friends, so nobody talked about the friends and the rapes. And in the West, all the Russians are the bad guys, and only the Russians raped, not the Americans, not other friends. The British were a little bit better and softly, they were cooler.
Yes.
Thanks, finish.
Yeah, so I think from my understanding, like my perspective, I do understand what you're saying with your term of like, it does have to, it does need to be on a higher agenda, 100%. And it does really need to be outlined kind of at the top, but the actual work and where it happens is a community. It's in country. It's the resources that are already there. It's frameworks that are already set up for rights of the child. It's using those tools and drawing from them and being able to deliver them in country, because the situations or the policies that might need to be changed in Bosnia will be completely different to what it might be in Rwanda or what it might be in Uganda. You know, some of them will be exactly the same, some of them won't exist, you know, and across the board. But there will be very unique legal situations that are, you know, very central to Bosnia and not the same elsewhere. So it can't necessarily be just blanketed approach. The awareness does have to be raised from the top, because otherwise that's how you generate that catalyst to change.
And the responsibility must be laid down.
100%.
Otherwise, probably the rights will always be inferior to all kinds of other interests, as I've seen and heard.
Yeah.
Yes, Elna?
True, I agree with you. But there is one thing that I think is common to all children born of war, wherever they come from, and that is that they are looked upon as they are the children of the enemy, and they are looked upon as the enemy by their own society, their local society, and by their families, and by the school, and by themselves. And that, I think, is very important. It is a fact. And it creates guilt, shame, and a feeling of less value inside the children born of war. And I think the most important the societies can do to change this terrible enemy picture is to see the situation from the children's point of view and try to change it, the picture of the enemy. The picture made it wider. Of course, it was terrible during the war, but it is also another story from countries. There's music, there's culture, there's heroes.
I want to speak to the researchers and what can be done, but I wanted to also just contribute to this issue of I think it is self-stigmatization on one end, where as the children born of war grow up, there's a recent article that kind of speaks to, one is they see those in Uganda in that context because of the being treated as outcasts and that sense of not belonging. Between them and the mothers, they blame themselves more and stigmatize themselves on behalf of the mother. It is me, and the question is how to help and work with them to use this energy to, to the fullest, to raise the awareness and make an impact. And that is the point I think I just wanted to add to that. Then to us, the researchers, and it is my personal observation, and I may be wrong, and it is that I've read some publications going out, for example, in Uganda, looking at approaches of reuniting children with their families, the role of the father being very important, raised by even some of the child mothers as Evelyn, but it's overstated as it's one of the approaches that should be that because we are patriarchy society and the family lineage is linked to resources and land ownership, then children born of war should search for their family or their father's lineage and so on, but without also showing the drawback and what could be the potential risk if it's not done appropriately. So for me, that is one area for the researchers and the contribution here, and then the definition of children born of war. And I think constantly we are finding some definitions that are connecting so much of other groups into children born of war, and I think it's very easy to be off track with this and maybe have misleading recommendations and so on. So for me, the awareness should be also on the researchers' side and the data and management of data. So I'll just end at that point.
Thank you. Yes, I guess we could have a whole panel of a workshop of a week on when it comes to those issues. Maybe we'll have that in future. We are basically where we have ended, but I would like to give you the time for one very short, very final statement that you can share with us. Winfried?
Yes, very, very briefly. My sister-in-law helped me to handle my fate. She wrote a very impressive letter. If you want to read it, it's possible in English. And I have reconciled with my fate and the unknown father. What might have been going on in my mother's mind? When did she accept me? I was breastfed for more than 3 years. That must have changed her attitude. Today I thank my mother, who let me survive, gave me the gift of life. And what about the father who fathered me? If I can't love him, I can forgive him. Without my parents, I would not be alive, not love and not be loved. And I thank all those who accompanied me to this realization. Special Ingvild.
Okay. Yeah. Also, I really hope that this scientific research will be able to do that, to see the things from the children's point of view. That's what I think is most important. And make actual research on children's living condition, where they are, the local living condition, and basic research on the children's health and education. I think that's the most important thing. And I hope this project will be able to influence different societies and politicians in order to make it easier for the future children born of war. And I'm also very happy to hear about the Children Born of War Foundation, where you are the leader, Ingvild. And I will tell you that last week I was invited to my great-grandchild's classroom. He is 14. They had learned about the Second World War in the class, and they also seen this film, this play, My Child, Lebensborn, yes. And I was very impressed by how much they know and how much they have learned, or how interested they were. And I think such things are very important. Yes. So, of all my heart, I wish you both, you and all of you, in your future.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm very grateful that this project has started. I'm very interested with the research that it can produce, hopefully, and it will be able to have actual proof of these people's circumstances, conditions and barriers to be able to receive education and just basic human rights. I think for me, this has been a long time coming, and it's so important and so integral to our history, our future. And I think that with this information and with it being put on the agenda, we can move into a different era. And ultimately, I think, my story is one that's still ongoing. I'm finding out new information all the time. Every time I go back to Bosnia, there's something else I didn't know. And I think that this is just part of our lives. And although each story and each person that you listen to will be different, I think there's something to say about it's not just a story. And I think a lot of my life, especially dealing with media and things like that, it's just been a story. It kind of ends when they leave. It doesn't, it continues on. It's a journey, it's a person, it's a human being, and everyone needs to be treated like that. And so I think that needs to be at the forefront of a lot of people's minds.
Norman.
I thank the project writers and for having this table, that this discussion can happen, and I hope that such discussions continue, where a panel has the people who have decided to take this role, which is a very tasking one, and I thank them for coming out, but I request them to also link up with the groups such as those in Uganda, and so to have between them some support group of a sort, so that at some point we may be meeting at least one from Uganda who is representing those children. To my information now is that they have a WhatsApp group among them, so but it's their right, and so they can only be supported through people who have lived the experience. So that's my last word.
An excellent idea. And with that, I would like to once again thank you so much for sharing very personal stories and reflections with us all.